welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of the movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose, at Thundergrunt Bob, on any useless social media you want. And right now, Jimmy's going to introduce himself.
I useless social media. I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant. I'm at Jimmy R. George on Twitter and _ Jimmy George on Instagram. I haven't been using them very often, but you can catch me there. Maybe next year.
Okay, Jamie.
I'm Jamie Nash. I am a screenwriter. I'm also the writer of Save the Cat Writes for TV and the Save the Cat Beat Sheet Workbook. You can find me at my website, jamienash.net, or on various socials. You'll find me wherever.
Okay, and today we're going to, I guess, kind of in keeping with our last episode, we did the Jason Reitman film Saturday Night, and now we're continuing, I guess, our sort of small celebration of the 50 years of SNL with The Blues Brothers, the first SNL movie, one of Steven Spielberg's few acting roles.
And before we should have done Saturday the 14th.
Yeah, Saturday.
We should have just kept doing Saturday movies. Would have been awesome.
The whole rest of the year is all Saturday movies.
Maybe next year we should do like a show that starts with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There's probably, I don't know if we can
the whole week, do it like
the whole week.
7 months worth of weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, before we get into our talking points, we're going to go around our little table here and we're going to say our relationship to this movie, anything you want, your personal thoughts about the movie. I think we should start with Jamie on this one.
Okay. So I talked about my love for SNL last week and how when I was a little kid, that was a big deal to me. So The Blues Brothers was the first R-rated movie I saw in the theater when I was only 8 years old because I convinced my dad I had to see it. So it was a very, very big deal when I saw this. I mean, probably more hype than Raiders of the Lost Ark because that didn't have a lot of hype, and a lot of other movies. Like when Star Wars came out, I really didn't know anything about Star Wars until I saw it. But this is like one of my first like hyped movies. Like I have to go see it. I can't wait to see it. I had the Soul Man 45 I used to play all day long at my house. But I was a big Blues Brothers fan going into it. And honestly, when I saw the movie back then, I probably was a little disappointed. Like I didn't know exactly what I was going to get. You know what I mean? But as an 8-year-old, it kind of, there were some very exciting moments that stayed with me forever, like the mall chase and stuff like that. But then there are like the music numbers. Some of them I liked. I liked when the Blues Brothers were singing, but then I didn't really know these other iconic, singers. Listening back on it, it's amazing. Like I almost like it more now because I can appreciate the music numbers and that music has become so ubiquitous in my life since then. But yeah, I think when I was a kid, I was a little, I didn't hate it. I loved parts of it. But I really wanted to love it as a kid. And I was like a little confused by it. You know what I mean? It was just like, whoa, is this a movie? What is this? Like, maybe because it wasn't as jokey as I thought it was going to be or something, or,
were you expecting a musical at that age?
I don't think so. I don't know what I was expecting.
It is a musical. It counts as a musical.
Yeah. Like I'm trying to remember, when did Airplane come out?
Before 70s. This 70s. Yeah. This is 80. So
I was a huge Airplane guy too. So maybe I was expecting something more like that, like a joke per minute kind of thing. And this, the comedy in this is more subtle. And in some ways it makes you work a little bit for the comedy a little more. Like it's not like right in your face, like kind of laugh out loud kind of stuff. It kind of lets you participate in the comedy a little more. It was a little more sophisticated than maybe I was ready for at that age. By the way, played fine for an 8-year-old kid. Like I don't remember, with the exception of some bad words like shit creek or something that I probably took away from it. I don't really think it was really that, debaucherous of a movie in some ways for an 8-year-old. But anyway,
The family stamp of approval.
Yeah, exactly. I think what's
The
funny
Catholic
is
Church recommended this one its 30th anniversary. So
that's what I was about to say. There are a lot of
sorry.
like spiritual reviews and stuff like that in the Catholic Church and stuff that said it kind of had a good message in its own way, even though it's kind of odd that they would say that, because it's like, okay, go through a mall and crash into stores as long as you follow Jesus's message. I don't know.
Or just like a jilted lover trying to murder her ex.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
I don't know.
weird that the Catholic Church gave it its stamp of approval. But
Right.
in some ways, when I watched it last night, I was like thinking, like, was this totally inappropriate to see when I was 8 years old? Maybe a little bit, but not. It really wasn't that bad, because it kind of is like a cartoon. It kind of has some Laurel and Hardy, some Bugs Bunny. It has some kind of silly stuff in it, so to speak. But anyway, that's what I got for you. So very important movie. But when I was a kid, I was like, I probably pretended I liked it, but I don't think I did totally. I think I was on the fence, but I was probably like, oh, that was so great. But I was like, I don't quite understand it at the time.
You needed to grow into it.
I had to grow into it a little bit. Yeah.
All right, Jimmy.
So this is only the second time I've seen this movie. The first time, I know, right? The first time my dad showed it to me, one of the few that my father was like, you got to see this movie. He was on a Belushi kick, showing me old Belushi stuff when I was a teenager. This was after the beta days for anyone who listened to the show. This was on VHS because my dad was a format snob when they first came out, and he had to have a beta machine. So then all the cool movies we could never rent because there weren't any available. So this is I haven't seen this probably since I was like 12 years old, and 44 for context, and I loved it. What I was distracted by, and then Bob informed me that this was like at its time one of the most expensive movies ever made, which tracks. I was the producer in me, just like my jaw kept going on the floor because like the effort, dude, like the maximum effort in every fucking scene. I mean, there must be like 500 extras in this movie at least. Every scene the room is filled with like it's an amazing set. The costumes are awesome. There's 50 extras all doing insanely choreographed shit. Like it is so much effort went into making this, you can just tell, and like it's like a nightmare to me as a producer. Like I'm picturing the production bible for this thing as I'm going, and I just kept getting lost in like, oh my god, like how fucking difficult this scene must have been to do, and they would never do it now, which is like so also sad. Like we're never gonna see anything like this again, like some madcap insane gigantic budget comedy from an SNL skit. Like, come on, like this is never going to happen again. Everything in this movie would be green screened instead of like 100 people on screen. There'd be 2 people standing in front of a green screen with some lame ass CGI extras in the background. So I appreciate the production itself as I watch this, and how difficult it must have been to pull it off. And this is not a podcast about John Landis, but it's hard not to like think
There's
about it.
There's plenty of those, and they're
it's
probably
like
not too positive. Validly so.
So, but you gotta appreciate, or at least me, who's made movies that are just like this movie's ice budget, like can appreciate the amount of collaboration that needed to happen to make this thing. So
like they shut down Chicago,
dude,
to do stuff like that. Yeah,
like did all the car crashes.
I mean, the mall scene, apparently it was a shuttered mall that they kind of had to recreate. So they actually drove through a mall, but it was a recently closed mall that they.
Can you imagine? They'd never do that now. Never.
They wouldn't give this kind of budget to a comedy.
Exactly.
Period. It's not like they wouldn't do that. Nobody would pay for that for a comedy now.
Yeah,
you're wrong. Back in action. $200 million budget.
You're right. Yeah,
Well,
but Cameron Diaz is back.
Cameron Diaz, Jamie Foxx, $200 million.
Right.
insane. Oh my God. So that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so what I was gonna say is, if you've ever listened to this show, I don't think anyone on this show needs to hear me wax poetic about my love of SNL or movies such as the Blues Brothers. You could go back and listen to the Wayne's World episode and think about how much I love Wayne's World. It's the same thing here. I don't need to repeat that. I love Blues Brothers with all my heart. It's been with me since I was a kid. It's a background noise for movie for me. I'll put it on just to feel the comfort of familiarity because I listen to, I can just listen to the movie, right? So that, pushing that aside, I wanted to say two things. One, I really never really, as much as I'm a fan of SNL, I never really looked this up. There's only 11 SNL movies, which I thought, for some reason, I thought the number was 15 or up.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I never counted in my brain.
I kind of thought there were a bunch I just never saw. You know what I mean?
Right,
like
right.
Some side character. I mean, Bob would have seen him, but I've
seen all of them, and I actually like all of them. That there's not one that I don't like, even the ones people hate. And there's only one TV series, which is the MacGruber TV series.
Oh yeah, I was
that's
like,
the only
I
one.
couldn't remember. I was like, what is that?
Yeah, that's only one TV series. Unless there's a Blues Brothers TV series or something I'm missing, or a cartoon I forgot about. But this is so by far the most successful one, without question. Wayne's World butts up right against it, but like, it was like Blues Brothers is the first SNL movie, and I think critically and monetarily, it is without a doubt the most successful one. And those two things go downhill after that, no matter what. After Wayne's World and Blues Brothers, it's like a drop. Even though I'd argue that the most SNL movie is Coneheads. As far as like what is SNL,
Right.
I think Coneheads is the most SNL movie.
I love Coneheads.
I love Coneheads too. We should do Coneheads at some point.
I love it. It's great.
I truly love Coneheads. Anyway, the thing I wanted to say, which might set up something for later, we're going to talk about, and I don't even know if I have a fully formed thought here, but Blues Brothers is a weird thing, that the fact that it is the first SNL movie, I always found it so odd to me personally. I grew up watching VHS tapes of the original cast, and so like the original performances were something in my life. I actually saw them before I saw this movie, like, you know, of them on SNL. And the thing about it is, Jamie, you might remember this more than Jimmy, but the Blues Brothers on the show weren't funny.
No,
it's
they were just a music. They were a music.
They were just a music act. It's just a music act. It's not actually a comedy act on SNL.
And they were only on there. I didn't look this up, but I think 4 or 5 times.
It was like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
It's such an odd thing that SNL, this entity of comedy, that the first SNL movie and the most successful and the most iconic is one based off a musical sketch that isn't even comedy. It's so odd, and that's what I wanted to say about this movie. I've seen criticisms of this movie before because people have attacked like the fact that like I don't get what the joke is. There's jokes in the movie, but what is the joke of Blues Brothers? The actual premise of Blues Brothers itself, I've seen it attacked before by people I respect. And the thing is, I sort of agree with them.
Yeah,
it has nothing to do with my love of the movie, but I agree with them. The actual like premise of those characters is not funny. It's not a comedy premise whatsoever. The fact that the movie is funny is built around them.
Yes.
They themselves are not figures of comedy, nor, you know, two Catholic boys who are raised in an orphanage by you know, a singer who taught them you know, the old ways of, you know, blues music. It's not really like, it's not like Coneheads, right? Like the pitch for Coneheads or Wayne's World or something. You say it on paper and it's like, why is that funny? That's not funny. So I think that goes into like my perception of the movie a lot now as I'm older. I'm always like, I find it so weird, especially watching the 50th and everything. I was just thinking like, the movie started with, they didn't go with a comedy sketch first to make a movie. But I think that goes into the construction of the movie and finding the comedy and how this had to be written. Right?
Yeah. And I think you're hitting on a lot of interesting things about this movie. So the Blues Brothers started as like, I think their original beginnings was when, remember we talked last week about the bee outfits and stuff like that.
Right,
I think
right,
I
yeah.
think there was a big musical number they did with somebody, and they came out and Dan Aykroyd played the harp and John Belushi, but they were dressed as the bees in the bee costumes, right?
Right,
And
right.
they really were into the music. And Dan Aykroyd was really into the blues, and he actually rented a bar during the first season of SNL that everybody would come and hang out, and it was all about music, and he had an amp and they jam and stuff like that. So the Blues Brothers, they started piece by piece. Like they borrowed a hat from this guy, they kind of wore suits from this. They started to build a band, but
They did the bee costumes with the Blues Brothers too. Remember that? They
yes,
like
yes,
merged the bee
yes,
costumes with the Blues Brothers stuff.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
And apparently they were the opening act of the show for a while. They would come out and do a little song and get the audience up. They were like the warm up act, and they would just do this, and everybody would get excited, and then they do the show, and then they actually opened for Steve Martin on tour, and Steve Martin was like selling out, So
Yeah.
the Blues Brothers would open for him. So they were just a music act, and when I went to see him, and this speaks to why I was a little confused, I just thought they were two super cool dudes, and I really liked their music. Like they were like one of my favorite musical groups at the time when I was 8 years old. You know what I mean? It was like I was like, oh, this is good, and I'd listen to their music over and over again, and they actually had #1 albums on the charts. Like the soundtrack to this was one thing, but even before that, they were literally a #1 music act.
I think that's also important here to say is like they're real musicians and real performers. Dan Aykroyd and and
and
Belushi like are actually good. They're not just the
and
guys from SNL.
and
Do you
Paul,
guys remember I said Dan Aykroyd is in We Are the World? That
Yeah,
oh
yeah.
yeah, that's right, that's
that
right, yeah, yeah.
it was so strange to watch that
But
documentary.
he's a real
And it's
musician.
like Bob Dylan, Michael Jackson, and Dan
Dan Aykroyd.
Aykroyd. It's like what but the time capsule of when that was recorded speaks to like how big
But also
they were in that
what
time.
Jamie's saying is that he had that respect of having the musical prowess, right?
Yes.
I mean, he did.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
did.
So I'm trying to support
Also,
that,
a great fucking dancer.
yeah.
Dan Aykroyd was a great dancer. Anyway, Jamie, sorry.
No, and then the band itself that they played with, Paul
Amazing.
Schaefer kind of put that together. So and it was I even read an interview that said like people thought they were selling out to Hollywood, and they were like, no, we're not. This is like a real band, or something like that. They thought it was a gimmick, but it was never really viewed as a gimmick per se to them. So when the movie came, and this is why what Bob's saying, I feel the same way. It doesn't feel like an SNL movie. I never even really think of it as an SNL because it wasn't an SNL skit. The comedy doesn't come from SNL. And is Lorne Michaels even a producer on it? I don't even know if he is.
I actually don't know. I can look it up.
For some reason, I don't think he is. But I could be wrong. And
it is an SNL movie though. It counts. It just doesn't feel like it.
It doesn't feel like it. Because it's not like a character with a catchphrase that we came to know. It's just two guys, and it's like, well, what's this movie going to be about? Almost as if, they were a real music act, and this is a silly movie they made about their origin story or something like that.
Right, right.
But they, so I never really viewed it as an SNL movie in that way, even though it definitely is. But I know what I was going to say is, I think it got greenlit largely because Belushi was the biggest thing in America. He was like this huge rising star and just came off Animal House, which he was kind of not a background part, but he was like the funny guy in that movie.
He was the animal of their Muppets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think they were like, okay, well, this guy's money in the bank. If he wants to do this, and this Blues Brothers thing, it's a #1 album, John Landis is in, he directed Animal House. Let's do it. It's like, it was kind of which is the way movies used to get greenlit back in the 70s. Less so now. Now it's like, and what Marvel character is this? Or whatever.
Right.
But so I think all those things combined, and they were like, of course, this is money. These are like the coolest people coming off the funniest movie ever made. At the time, that's what Animal House was considered. Let's do it. So
No, you're right. I guess that's what I was trying to say. Without you, kind of helped me there, Jamie. Is like it is an SNL movie. People consider it the first SNL movie, but if you actually watched SNL at the time or lived through that time or anything, it's just like weird that it is, and it started everything. It started a trend which turned into the thing we understand as SNL movies, which actually seemed promising at the beginning, right? Because you had Wayne's World, and it was like, oh, this might work, and then people started stop. They were just like, do we hate these things now?
Yeah, and there's something about it that when I rewatched it, it feels like a real movie, as opposed to like, I mean, not that Wayne's World isn't a real movie, but there's something about Wayne's World that feels like the colors and the staging, and it feels like this comedy thing. Where this one almost has some weird grit to it, and the it has like 70s filmmaking style to it in some ways.
Well, everything's dirty, man. Like,
It's
I
dirty.
love that about it.
It's
It's
not
dirty. The cinematography is not studio lighting.
it's
just
not haha comedic in its visuals. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing. If you were to watch this with the sound off, you might actually think it's like not a comedy in some ways.
I mean, look how it opens.
Especially that
grab shots of Chicago. It's like it's not get ready to laugh. It's not like that. Like it is a weird movie, man.
There is something about it that reminds me of the first Ghostbusters and how they treat New York, the car, all that the car almost seems like
the
their cousins,
Bluesmobile.
which is interesting that Universal Studios, like the two things people remember when they go to the park, like of walk around characters, are Ghostbusters and Blues Brothers, and they had the cars, right? It's kind of interesting that they're both Aykroyd influenced kind of things.
He even says, "Who are you going to call?" Which I was like, "Oh,
he does say that."
Yeah.
Hey, Jamie, move your mic just a little bit outward.
Okay.
For the listeners, they can hear. I'm not editing it out. Yeah. Anyway, I was gonna say too that it's weird too, because even if you compare it to Ghostbusters, those characters are funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like Vakeman is an entity of comedy, right? Like Ray is an entity of comedy, but Jake and Elwood, to me, they barely speak. They're these like kind of totems in the middle of the movie that everything wraps around to make funny. It's just, I don't know. It's a weird thing that happened that worked. There's no reason why this all should have worked so well. But I agree with you, Jamie, that it has a different feel than every other. I mean, Wayne's World being the prime example, the most successful one. All the rest feel like sketch comedy movies more so.
Yes.
I remember when we did the Wayne's World episode, Jamie, I think you broke down the first 2 minutes and there were like 18 jokes of Wayne's World in the first,
which is great.
And this thing is the slow. It takes 5 minutes to even like meet John Belushi, and
it's almost like if there are jokes at the beginning, they're editing jokes or shot jokes.
Yeah,
and it's not really till we get to like the Penguin where they're doing the Exorcist kind of haunted house stuff and things that it's like really broad, or something.
Yeah, right.
It's
very niche.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us. Oh,
yeah. I was going to do the box office. I figured that would float in here. So the box office for this movie, I think Bob said it was 115 worldwide.
Yep.
And
50s. Yeah.
50s in 57 in 1980. So just to give you I haven't done 1980. I'm not sure if I've ever done 1980, so I had to do the list.
I don't think we've ever we've never done a movie from 1980.
Yeah, because I'm
looking
at
I was born.
I'm looking at the top 20 in 1980, and we haven't done any of these movies. So who knows? I'm going to quiz you. Who knows what the number one movie in 1980 was?
No clue.
Might have had a cameo from someone in this particular movie.
I should know these movies.
Oh, is this a Spielberg movie?
I'm not going to give you any more. It was Empire Strikes Back.
Okay.
At 203 million. Now, here's the thing. I
Okay.
looked up Empire Strikes Back. The budget is around the same as this movie, which is funny. And
But doesn't that makes sense?
yeah.
Like, that's not surprising. Hearing what Blues Brothers cost is nuts.
By the way, the budget of Blues Brothers and the budget of Empire Strikes Back started out at like 17 million or something like that. And then it ballooned to like in the 30 million range. And there were other movies that were more expensive, like Superman, the movie was that was always touted when I was a kid as the most expensive movie ever made. I think that was 50 million at the time.
That's the difference in our ages, Jamie, because for me, Waterworld, that's
right.
When I was a kid, that was the story, right? Waterworld, most expensive ever.
The weird thing was the big budget movies back then felt relatively cheap. Like Lucas didn't want to spend more than 30. It was his own money. So he wasn't going to spend like 100 million on The Empire Strikes Back. He was being very cheap. Anyway, the 1980s movies are fascinating to me. And this was a very important year of me seeing movies. I think I saw every one of these movies, maybe a couple exceptions. I think there's like 2 in the theater. Okay, here we go. 9 to 5 was the number 2 movie.
Hell yeah.
That's awesome.
I saw that in the theater.
That's how successful 9 to 5 was.
100
It was right under Star Wars.
103 million domestically. And
holy shit.
That's how big 9 to 5, a juggernaut, kind of forgotten by today's audiences in some ways. Like not a movie people talk about or anything a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. Beloved, but not talked about, I think.
But another movie where the song was, huge too.
Yeah,
musical.
Right?
Okay, Stir Crazy, number 3 at $101 million. Okay. Another movie I saw in the theater.
I mean, Richard Pryor was right.
Too young to see is Kramer versus Kramer. 94 million for Kramer versus Kramer.
Jesus.
Any Which Way You Can. Another kind of forgotten movie in some ways. $70 million. Private Benjamin. 69 million.
Okay.
Number 7, Coal Miner's Daughter. I'll skip the numbers now. They're in the 60s. Smokey and the Bandit 2, which I think has some similarities with the Blues Brothers.
It does,
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Blues Brothers, number 9. So it falls at number 9. Ordinary People, number 10.
And that won Best Picture.
Here's an interesting one because I wonder what the budget of this one is. Popeye, number 11.
Hell yeah. Love Popeye.
1980. Wow.
That is a collection of movies, man. That is nuts.
I saw all of these in the theater except Stir Crazy and Ordinary People. I didn't see Ordinary People in the theater.
The variety.
I was going to say the dynamicism of that list versus if you read like 2020, just 2020 or 2019 or something.
Well, just to round these out just super quick, because it still is The Shining, Cheeks and Chong's next movie, Caddyshack, I'm surprised Caddyshack didn't make more, to be honest. Friday the 13th, a movie, I don't know, Brubaker. Do you know Brubaker?
I've heard of it, yeah.
I've never seen
The Jazz Singer, Flash Gordon, Bronco Billy, and Raging Bull. That's your top 20.
Damn.
Then Xanadu is 21, which is also kind of fascinating.
I'm jealous. I'm jealous, Jamie, that you got to see Caddyshack and Blues Brothers on the big screen.
I did not see Caddyshack. I don't think I saw Caddyshack.
You're probably too young for Caddyshack.
I was too young. Most of the R-rated ones, like the first 10, I saw all but Ordinary People and Stir Crazy. The back 10, I only saw Flash Gordon. I saw in the theater. Bronco Billy was a huge movie for me as a kid, and I saw Xanadu, which was 21.
So Empire and Flash Gordon in the same year. Interesting.
Yeah.
And 9 to 5 was number 2. That's
9 to 5 number 2.
If you just said all those movies, I would never have put 9 to 5 in the number 2 slot ever.
That's awesome.
I would have put Blues Brothers in number 2 before I put that, but I'm not dogging 9 to 5. It rules. I love that movie, but it's like surprising how successful 9 to 5 is.
What's funny to me about this is when I think back to my childhood and watching these movies, I remember 9 to 5 being like the second biggest movie of the year. I remember it that way. I remember Kramer versus Kramer being a huge movie, and I remember Popeye and Flash Gordon kind of being duds. They weren't quite, living up to the hype. And I'm not saying I didn't like I loved, like, especially Flash Gordon was huge for me, but I don't know. They were kind of like they were kind of box office busts in some ways.
Gotcha. Jamie loves listening to the movies, man. It's like your favorite thing.
Yeah, this one especially because we hadn't done 1980 yet, so I was like, I was like, this one's a good year. This is a good year.
That is a very dynamic list.
Yep.
Well, who wrote this shit?
Yeah, so Dan Aykroyd wrote the first draft of the script. He didn't know how to write a screenplay. He had no idea. And apparently it was 324 pages, his draft. And as a joke, he put the cover of I can't remember
he put it in a
book
phone book, right?
Like they handed in, like he put that as the cover. And John Landis got hired he was hired to direct it, but he was told to rewrite it. And I can't remember much time he had, like 3 weeks or something like that. And it really became, I think Dan Aykroyd's was almost like a story Bible. It wasn't in screenplay format. It kind of went through the history of how the band got together and all this backstory notes and things like that. It was just like this big compilation of the origin story of the Blues Brothers.
He wanted it to be 2 movies at one point, right? I remember that.
That's right. It was called The Return of the Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
And he had some weird author name, like the Scriptotron 9000 or something was the writer of it. And then Landis came and he had to, cut it down to whatever it was, 120 pages. That said, they had been experimenting with storyline stuff for a while. Like the liner notes of one of their albums had like certain things about the brothers, and they had been getting kind of like ideas from people that they were on SNL with and friends of theirs about, like, why don't you be brothers? And then they came up with the orphanage angle where they weren't really brothers. They were, brothers through the orphanage. And just little pieces over the years that they had been gathering, kind of a backstory. And then they turned it into the script.
I remember seeing some interview with Dan Aykroyd where he said the original thing in his version was like the Nazis played a much bigger part and they were trying to defund the orphanage and take over and turn it into their new home base.
Oh,
so the whole, instead, like in the movie now, they're just people they run into, but they used to be like the main part of the plot. I'm assuming, I can assume John Landis came in like, I'm simplifying everything. Got rid of all of that. Yeah. But
I find it inspirational to hear, like, to think of the writer of Ghostbusters not knowing how to write a screenplay.
Well,
and how far that they came,
Aykroyd, but it's also like, okay, you guys have you've seen or heard of Nothing But Trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Aykroyd is someone who is, I consider him a comic genius, but he's also someone that needs a partner to rein him in. You need a Howard Ramis or you need a John Landis to be like, there's good ideas here, but we got to cut out the fat or else it's absolutely insane. We kind of saw it in Saturday Night with him, the character they showed being like obsessed with the type of guns and everything like that. Like that's how Aykroyd works. He thinks the technical issues are way more important than they are.
You basically need a quality control.
You need a quality control friend. Like Aykroyd is a genius, but you have to rein him in or else you can get things that the audience won't respond to.
But it's cool to think about, like, he didn't even know where to start,
Right,
I love that.
And
knowing where he goes from here. Yeah.
The part I skipped on was the first thing, because I think they sold based on the idea. They pitched Blues Brothers movie, $17 million, and they said, okay, get me a script. We'll greenlight it, right? So he went off to do this 324-page script. But before he did that, he tried to get SNL writers to co-write it with him. And for some reason, maybe because they knew the way he was or something, they all turned him down. So he had to do it by himself. you think
Like, dude, I can't do this.
if somebody came to me with a greenlit movie starring John Belushi and going to be directed by John Landis, even if I was an SNL writer, you'd think, that might be a good idea to write on that, to get a credit on that. But those guys all turned him down.
But it's almost for the better, right? Because I feel like the SNL writers would have made the Blues Brothers themselves these quippy comedy characters, and everything we set up at the top. It's like that's why this movie's unique, is that they're not sketch characters, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They would have made them that though. So actually, it like them not wanting to work with Aykroyd actually made the movie way better, kind of, I would think.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there anything else on the writing, Jamie?
Nope, I think that's it.
That's everything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you guys want to talk about two-person protagonists?
Yeah. So the one thing I find interesting in this movie, and I'm going to tie it to the arc because I think it all relates to an extent, is I'm not sure who the hero of the story is. Like, is it Aykroyd's character? Or is it Belushi's character? I find them inseparable. I find them
they're in one entity.
They're one entity. They're the Blues Brothers. Even though you could make a case for Belushi because he is the one that gets out of prison, he kind of, in some ways, Aykroyd does things like he's the execution guy and Belushi's the idea guy to an extent. And Belushi's the one who gets the message in the church, what they have to do. There could be an argument for that, but I personally think it's one entity. And then the question is, if you agree with that, what's their arc? Can you have an arc for two characters? If two characters, because the other interesting thing about this story, if you were the typical way you'd write a buddy comedy like this with two characters is you put conflict between them. There'll be some relationship arc. But there's no conflict between them.
Yeah, they're the same. Yeah, it's weird.
They're the same.
I mean, it's pretty obviously flat, right? I mean,
yeah, I think
they're the same guys at the end they are at the beginning. I don't think they've changed.
They're the two coolest people in the world in some ways, and in the end, they're still the same two coolest people. They don't really learn anything. They don't really change.
They're not going to stop committing crime at the end of the movie.
There was a bit of arc of awesome though throughout.
Remind us what
like
that is.
They were making. Yeah, Jamie, can you explain arc of awesome?
Yeah, and honestly, flat arc is the same thing. So it's arc of awesome, flat arc. Arc of awesome is the term I first heard from this guy Keith Calder. He's a producer who used to hang out in the word player boards, and he defined arc of awesome as the character doesn't change. They're awesome. They're awesome from the beginning, and they're so awesome that they change the world around them. And I think that's what's going on here. And the flat arc is it K.M. Wieland, I think, in her book about arcs, she defines the flat arc, and it's pretty much the same thing. I think the two are pretty much the same.
So like Marty McFly,
right,
changes the world around him, and the characters around him grow from his presence. And I feel like the Blues Brothers make everybody around them better by their own characters being who they are. Yeah.
Right. The world,
you can make a list of everything good they did in the movie, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Even being criminals, all the good stuff they did.
Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of times there are stories about people with code, not Back to the Future so much, but more like Superman or maybe something like Braveheart, even though there's some arc in there where it's people with like moral codes and on missions, like almost divine missions in some ways.
Well, right.
So yeah.
And the world is trying to stop them. Like the world around them is trying to make it hard for them to complete their divine mission. But because they're on a divine mission, they, work through it and keep fighting. And that's exactly
that fits perfectly.
It is. I'm fudging in the divine mission because it works for this, but it really is kind of true. It really is kind of true.
No, it's true.
Yeah,
they're not the only thing that's unique here is they're not righteous characters,
right?
But I think it works regardless, right? Like they're criminals, but they're not evil.
They're not evil, and they're actually sort of nice. You know, it's a weird criminality that they have to them because
They wouldn't steal from a church. They would steal from a bank.
right.
You know, and
But
it's like, yeah.
we don't really see them steal from a bank in this.
We don't see them
movie
steal
or
anything, really.
Yeah, they don't really do anything. Like the only time they really seem to break the law is when the law tries to stop them from their divine mission. You know, I don't really think we see too many other law breaking. I mean, the restaurant scene is about as close as they get to kind of
Yeah.
being unruly or something or manipulative or whatever.
They got a
Everything
pretty
else,
good rooting resume.
they
Right?
do. They
Not
do.
that
Yeah.
that's not on the thing, but they got a pretty good one.
Jamie, on this topic, when you're because I think what's good to note about it is you can write a comedy and the character doesn't have to have an arc. You know, we see these aspiring screenwriters that you and I work with a lot, and everybody is sort of obsessed with like, my character has to have an arc, and like, you know, if you challenge that at all with them and go, well, maybe they could be like an arc of awesome. Have you thought about like, the construction of your story doesn't really work with them having this massive arc. It might be more entertaining based on like what you're trying to do if they're just awesome from the start and continue to be awesome. So do you run into that a lot where people are trying to ham fist in an arc where they don't need to?
No, I run into the opposite. I run
Oh,
into
really?
the opposite. Yeah, where there's no arc, you know, or
Okay, yeah.
there's barely an arc. I mean, to your point, maybe there's like hints of an arc, but it's not earned or something like that. Like that's to your point. I see that too, but I see more problems with lack of attention paid to an arc. You know, from people that are more interested in the plot, in the genre and things like that. And they really don't care as much about the arc and don't really do it. I rarely see an intentional flat arc and stuff I get consulting wise. Like somebody that
No, that's what I'm saying. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is I never see people try to do this
Yeah.
when they
Are you
send me a
saying because
comedy.
it's the default to add an
Yeah,
arc to a
to
character?
be the
Yeah,
default is like we got to have an arc, and
or else it's bad writing. If they don't have an arc, it's bad. That's
they
just a
think
false
they're
assumption.
scared. Yes, they're scared, and like often I'll bring comps in to the work, and I'll be like, look at this comp and look at this character. Like they're an arc of awesome, and you're trying to do this same story with an arc, and that's why like it's not working. Like maybe if you took this other approach. Jamie, what I was saying is I like never see people try to do this, and I think that this is a good
not only
to
that,
comedy.
but like I see people arguing about movies all the time and saying the writing is bad because no arc is present.
Yeah, and
When
it's
they're
like, it doesn't
arguing
have
about
to
movies
be.
that are doing this.
Yes,
And I don't jump in. I'm just saying I see it and I'm like, that's not bad, right?
Mhm.
It's a different
Yeah.
approach.
So I just thought, yeah.
I in all my days, I can never remember someone like consulting wise saying, "Oh, I'm trying to do the flat arc thing, the awesome arc of awesomeness." I can't ever remember somebody coming to me with that intentionally. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it usually takes special characters because it usually is like somebody like
Elle Woods.
Braveheart.
We did
or
Elle Woods,
Superman.
Legally
Yeah.
Blonde.
Woods,
She's changing everyone that she encounters in the story world
But
she's making them better.
As you say that though, I'll say something else though. I've written over 100 and some scripts. I'm not sure that I've ever intentionally tried to do a flat arc. I don't think I did.
You
Me neither.
hypocrite.
But I don't write broad comedies, so
I was gonna
Right.
say, like, of the list you said earlier, Jamie, I think we could have this same conversation about Caddyshack.
Mhm.
Even
Yeah.
Danny isn't really arc. It's all plot based, getting something done. It's not about somebody learning. Maybe
Yeah.
that's something with comedies too, of older comedies, that it wasn't about learning lessons or anything as much.
Well, that's the argument I hear more is like, if you ask me, like, what conversations do I have about arc that are problems?
Yeah.
It's more people saying, when I'm saying, hey, this character doesn't really arc, it's just kind of, and they say to me like, well, what about Back to the Future or something? You know, they'll try to throw some old movie at me that doesn't really have much of an arc. And we've talked about why Back to the Future is a flat arc. Or, recently somebody even said, like, not to relitigate this, or we've never done this movie, have we? Karate Kid. They were like, does
No, we
Karate
haven't.
Kid have an arc? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, and my bottom line with arcs is Daniel a different person from the beginning of the movie in the end? And I think definitely he's a different
Yes,
person.
Yes.
absolutely.
And just because you can't put your finger on what the theme is or something doesn't mean he's not a different person and therefore he has an arc. It just means you probably haven't done the work to give the label to what that arc is. So
The Blues
more,
Brothers are the same guys.
they're the same guys.
Absolutely.
They're
When they
the
get
same
out of
guys.
prison at the end, they're back to square one. There's no difference there.
But
So
yeah, I get that argument. Jimmy, do you get that by chance? What about this movie?
oh my
They don't
god,
have
I
an
mean,
arc.
that's like half of my time.
Yeah, that's the thing you hear most, right?
What
it's
about the work of this master
right.
who
Yeah.
spent 50 years
And
before
what
they
about a
wrote
racist?
this?
Has anyone ever said the Blues Brothers to either of you?
No.
No, I
No
just
one's ever used that?
I
Okay.
I thought it was, I love this talking point, and I thought maybe you were doing it because you don't see, and it sounds like you don't. Like I don't
Yeah,
see
I never
the flat
say.
arc attempted, and I would encourage someone who's writing a comedy
I-
like this that maybe that's a good approach to take with your main character.
I think if you're writing some kind of biopic about somebody like, it would have to be somebody like Martin Luther King or something, and even it probably has an arc if you're writing his thing. I think if you're writing some kind of biopic, a flat arc might actually work. If there was somebody with a vision and a dream and they were almost a superhero by internals. You know what I mean? Because they were
Yeah,
so
like a
strong.
David Lynch biopic would be Arc of Awesome.
Yeah. There'd be
Right,
something like that where he, in fact, a complete unknown, the Bob Dylan movie might be that. I watched it once and I didn't think of it, but it might
I just
be
watched
that.
Man on the Moon, and that's pretty much an arc of
That
awesome.
could be
Andy
it.
Kaufman in that
Yeah.
movie he's kind of
It's like,
flat arc.
I am this thing, the world doesn't accept it, but I'm going to keep on doing it.
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
what it is. Yeah.
So biopics, yeah, that might be a thing through biopic.
It might be. That's
do
the only
we-
thing. Like, I've done a couple biopics, and there's one I'm thinking might have some Arc of Awesome in it. That's the one, like, I'm thinking through all the things I've ever written, I'm like, that one thing might be Arc of Awesome. But I think it's kind of like Braveheart. Braveheart has an arc in the first 30, 40 minutes, and then he's Arc of Awesome. So it's kind of weird, and that's how
That's
my
this
biopic is.
interesting. That's that. Okay.
Yeah.
So his before world is like a whole movie of becoming the character that's gonna
they
change
kind
the
of do
world.
the origin story. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's like
Yeah, they
his
do,
wife.
yeah.
His wife is taken, and they get made and stuff.
I
and he
mean, I
gets-
haven't seen it in decades, so
Yeah.
I'll just have to take your word for it.
I could do a whole podcast on this subject just about Superman
Superman. Yeah.
and
sure.
what that property has gone through over 30 years. And, I mean, we literally have warring factions over the fact that someone tried to give him an arc. And then people saying, no, he should be a flat arc.
He's awesome.
They don't realize they're arguing that. The people that are arguing it don't realize that's the argument. Is, Zack Snyder tried to give him an arc, and other people are like, no, he
Right.
shouldn't have an arc. So they don't realize that's what they're arguing. But I think, I'm not a teacher, and a lot of people aren't. The reason this isn't probably done a lot is because people don't know it exists.
Yeah, they don't understand
people
how to wield it.
They don't know it exists, and they don't know how to wield it because they don't know it exists. So
Yeah.
when you say this to people, they're like, well, having no arc is bad, and that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's
What do
bad.
you mean I can't have the character I don't need the character to have an arc?
I'm sure Dan Aykroyd didn't know it existed.
No.
But he just had this idea that these two are the
Yeah.
coolest people in the world. Nothing affects them. They don't get scared. They don't have doubts. They just do. And he just made a movie like that. And
They
turned out
don't
to
even
be Blues
react to their
Brothers.
building exploding while they're in it. They're not going to change. They're
They just
never
shake the
changing.
rubble off.
My favorite thing about this movie on the rewatch, and it's going to sound like a really weird thing, is watching them during the car chases.
Yep.
Because they're just like, there's just, and the way Landis shoots that, I just love it. I don't know why.
Yep.
Every time we cut back to them and they're in the car chase and bouncing around and they're just kind of there, I'm like, that's my favorite thing about this movie. It's a weird thing to fit, but it's kind of speaks to the flat arc in some ways. They're just
Even if the car went off the road and started tumbling, they would just be like their faces would be
Yeah.
flat
they,
face.
they might hold their hat or something, but that's about
Right,
it.
but it's
you
like
know?
they're just like taking it. They're just like
Yeah.
straight. Yeah, they don't change, man.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the premise paint
Yeah.
to them? What is the added to
Well,
them?
I'll tell you why I said to them.
Okay.
Because so here's my thinking on this movie. I think when this movie was pitched, Blues Brothers, Belushi, there is no premise paint to this so much, right? I think
Yeah.
I think I think they invented the premise paint. Um, I think they kind of like Aykroyd sat down and in his mind it was there's blues, right? Um, the Blues Brothers. Why are they brothers? Oh, the orphanage. He kind of made that part up, but I think Chicago is part of it. I think of the underbelly of the Chicago and the secret world of the blues and music. I think that's part of it. Um, like, is car chases part of the premise paint? If I pitched you the Blues Brothers, would you be like, "Oh, that's a car chase movie"?
The blues has nothing to do with car
It
chases
has nothing to do with
or
it,
cars,
or
even.
cars.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by to them, because I think Aykroyd, or maybe it was Landis, who knows, was
The
like,
premise paint's more Chicago than it is the blues. You think
I
about it, like cars and everything.
I feel like the car chasing, and then the great. I love so much the third act when all the army is there and the hut 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 guys and all that stuff. Like, I can't tell you how much I love that stuff. And I think what that's doing is spoofing movies of the time. Like, it's it's almost saying, okay, you want a movie? We're going to give you a movie. And it's like amping up the movies of the time with car chases and lots of military guys and all this kind of wild stuff, and just taking it so far to the extreme, like bigger than any ordinary movie would do it for the Blues Brothers. I think
Right.
that's kind of the joke in some ways. It's like,
And it
doesn't make
it's kind of
sense.
to go with what you said before, is it takes the movie so out of control, but the main characters don't react
Right.
to it
Yeah.
being out of control. They're just kind of
Like,
they kind of like the movie's not reacting to what's happening either, almost.
yeah. I mean, the entire army is chasing after them, and they're just like waiting outside the door for Spielberg to open it,
Yeah.
because he's gone 5 minutes for lunch or something. It doesn't make any sense. So anyway, I think the
Also,
premise
that they
paint,
would call the army.
right. I think Aykroyd had to invent like what this movie's about totally. I think he was like, and I think this also is going to fit into our next thing that we talk about, story DNA. But I think it's an interesting thing, because it would almost be like if you took this to a screenwriter without, we had an IP, we had the Blues Brothers, they're a music group. What would you do with it? And he came back to them with this, like, and it's because he could,
Yeah.
so it's interesting. I don't know how much it's informed by like those Beatles movies were like beloved at the time. And I'm a huge Beatles fan, but I'm not really a fan of the Beatles movies. Like, I've tried watching them, but I know people a little bit older than me talk about like A Hard Day's Night as like one of the greatest movies of all time or something, or these other Beatles movies and stuff like that. I don't know how informed like the Blues Brothers is from those movies, because I'm sure those movies were important to Aykroyd and Belushi in some
Yeah,
way.
it's like a banned farce.
Yes, the
Like,
band farce. And I've never really heard them talk about that. And I
Spice
honestly,
World.
yeah,
Spice. I can't believe that's the first place.
I mean,
As you're not wrong though. Yeah,
You're not
Spice
wrong.
World in
You're not
itself
wrong.
is a farce too,
yeah,
of band
that's what I'm
movies.
saying.
So.
Yeah,
because
Yeah.
that you're absolutely right. That's what this is. It's a farce. It's like taking these characters and using some farcical, version of them in heightened circumstances that would never ever really happen.
As if they were real human beings
Yes,
and they went
yes.
through like the hardships to be who they are.
I I mean, when
Yeah.
I was a kid, I watched the Monkees on TV. You know,
Yep.
or
Love the
something like that.
Monkeys, right?
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, that entire show is banned farce.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure. So honestly, I've never thought about this, but that probably informs this movie to an extent,
Yes. Now that
especially
you're
with that
saying it,
era. You know, that
yes.
era of people that are a little bit older than myself. Those movies were big to them. Even I mean, to a lesser extent, like the Elvis movies or something like that. But still, you know, it's kind of there.
It is pretty funny that this only really has them playing on a stage in one scene. Well, two scenes, sorry.
Couple scenes. Yeah,
A couple
yeah.
scenes. But like
Yeah.
it's not like this whole movie, if like approached differently, the car stuff would be it does come out of nowhere, the fact that it's one of the greatest car movies ever. Why? It's such an odd I
And you know, most people will say the answer is cocaine. That's the answer.
Which, well, it was worked into the budget. Maybe that whole rumor is
Right.
that it's yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I mean, most people will say it is kind of that.
I don't know what to say about it, but you can feel that when you're watching it. I kept looking for white dust under people's nostrils.
I'm thankful for the movie being about cars. It's just under a microscope. It is pretty weird.
Well, as a kid, I loved the car parts, and I loved when the Blues Brothers were on stage. And the rest of the time, I was waiting for those moments. You know, I was like, come on, give me those moments. But you're absolutely right about the thing that they're not on stage. As a kid, that when I said I was a little frustrated by it as a kid, that was the thing that frustrated me most, because I really liked watching them and hearing them sing, and you only got a couple spots of that.
Well,
you know,
the reason I didn't include the country bunker scene is because it's not really the Blues Brothers on stage there. It's kind of them, you know, it's a joke. That's a joke performance by them in the movie.
right.
So it's not really the Blues Brothers performing. There's only really one Blues Brothers performance on stage in the movie.
That's right.
The finale.
And you'd think that the movie a normal movie like this would have several of that.
Several.
But it doesn't. It's not about that.
Yeah. It kind of speaks to me as a kid. Like, I wanted to see the Blues Brothers, but they gave me, you know, James Brown, and I was disappointed, you know, or something like that.
They gave you Ray Charles and you were disappointed.
They gave me Ray Charles, and I wanted to see these two guys from Saturday Night Live, but that's what I was there for, you know.
It's pretty funny.
Well, I had some yes and for this, but I'm not sure if I want to do it. It's because it's.
Well,
it's
was that everything you wanted to say on Story DNA, or
no? He hasn't even touched the Story DNA.
I was gonna. Okay.
He's doing.
Oh, you have yes and for premise paint.
Yeah, because this might be a good time. I guess I'll go ahead and do it. I've never talked about this before. We've never talked about this before. And it's like an advanced expansion of the notion of premise paint.
Okay.
So to Jamie's point that they were kind of like discovering it on the fly, like
what is the Blues Brothers?
What so when we talk about delivering on the promise of the premise, what we're saying is using premise paint to give us ideas on screen that are unique to what your movie is, or what the Blues Brother is, which is a complex thing with what Jamie said. But what we're really saying is promises, not just promise, because every concept has built in multiple promises within it. So I wanted to go into that. That's what I call the premise palette, which is basically imagine Bob Ross. So not Bob Rose, Bob Ross.
Right.
Bob Ross's palette, he used the same 7 colors for every single painting. And I love the idea that you can start with these basic ingredients and get something beautiful and different every single time. So that's where this was born out of. So every premise has between 6 and 10 promises minimum. And the thing is, sometimes it's 10 or more because there's more than one why now. I'm going to tell what they are. And a lot of times there's more than one of these, which is why there's more colors to play with. So bear with me, because I've never said this out loud. I'm going to stumble through it. But these are what I call the premise palette. All the different paints that you can play with from a concept. So the first one is why now, the time setting, the historical context. And in the case of Blues Brothers, you guys said it, right? It's 1970s Chicago. It's when like soul was declining and corporate America was taken over, and you feel that like tension on screen, you know, like the corporations are kind of there. That's why they tear up the mall. There's something to be said about that, like the blues versus the
Also,
corporate America.
just to add to your point here, all the legends that are in this movie were not like at the top of their game. They were forgotten, a lot of them, and they credit this movie for bringing them back. So like
Okay,
it was a reintroduction of that on top of them crushing the corporate message there. Like,
so that's like a very specific why now paint, right? That
right,
comes with
yes.
the Blues Brothers that they chose. Okay. The second one is and so you got to ask yourself, like, why couldn't this story happen at any other time? And that's the paint, right? Whatever that is, that's the paint. So the why now? It's
Orphanage.
1950. It's 1955 Hill Valley, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Is it the
why,
orphanage plot
why
line?
he and yeah, and that's right. Jake just got released from prison. That's another why now. The orphanage needs to be saved. That's another why now. So that's like why I talk about like there's more than one of these usually to play with. The second is why here, the place setting, the niche world. So Chicago, urban Chicago, and it's the backdrop for all of the stuff we just said. And then the third one is genre and subgenre. This one is musical comedy, a road movie, a crime movie, even though there's no really crime happening. It's got all of the hallmarks of a crime movie, like
Speeding.
people on the run from authorities who are, you know, they're trying to arrest them.
It's mostly traffic crime.
Yeah. And then I would argue, Jamie, I think you're exactly right. They were intentionally spoofing action comedies. Like that feels very intentional when you're watching it. That paint, that choice, it feels like they were like, how are all the ways that we can continue to spoof action comedies in the script? So the fourth one is just tone scale. It's the vibes, right? And you want to be using that vibes paint in every scene. And a lot of times I'll read a script where everything is being played with except for the vibes. And I'm like, this is missing the absurdist comedy cartoon vibes, you know? And then all of a sudden, when you put that tone paint on there, all of a sudden the scene pops when it wouldn't pop before. And then the fifth one is something I call a gimmick. And in this case, sometimes the genre is the gimmick, like musical is a gimmick, right? Like if you're doing something that's a musical comedy, you kind of got to use that gimmick in all the ways possible. And this one does. So it would be like going to the church if you weren't using this paint. It would be like you had the church scene with James Brown and no one sings, right? Like you'd be like, why aren't you using the gimmick here? Right. And then you'd have to go back and workshop the material and be like, how can I use my musical gimmick in a way that makes this pop and makes this Blues Brothers, you know? So, and then the sixth one is character relationships. We've got like the brothers, we've got the bandmates and the tension between that. We've got even individual scenes, we've got relationships. Every time there's characters on screen who have a relationship, you need to play with that paint. So like the example I'd use here, if you were writing a script and you were writing this script and Carrie Fisher was on screen, imagine if Carrie Fisher was on screen for a scene and she wasn't trying to kill Jake. You'd be like, why aren't you using the character relationship paint here? You know, so like there's a promise there that you've created that if you're not delivering it, if it will feel off, right? You'd be like, I don't understand why Carrie Fisher isn't trying to shoot him right now.
And the one scene that she's in where she's not trying to kill them, she's planning.
She's in the middle of it. Yeah. We see her loading up. So,
right.
But what I read all the time is a script where they'll have the script chock full of the Carrie Fisher scenes, and then we'll have a scene, and I'm saying you're missing the relationship paint here because you've promised that this is going to happen when she's on screen, and it's not happening. So you're not using that paint. So you're not delivering that promise of the premise. And then the last one is occupations and skill sets. in this one, I mean, the paint is constantly every scene, like the musical abilities, Elwood's extraordinary driving skills. Like if he's in a car, you better put the paint there where his skills are being shown, his insane driving skills. And if you're not showing his insane driving skills, you're not delivering on that promise. So
Right.
you need to use that paint. And Jake's charismatic persuasion. So like if Jake is in a scene where where they need to talk their way out of this shit and he's not doing that, then you're not delivering that promise, right? You're not playing with that paint. And so it's a high level thing. But every scene when I'm writing, I actually, Jamie, have started doing this the last 3 scripts I've written, because Jamie and I sort of workshopped this together years ago, and I've just been using it with clients to help them. I actually create the palette for every scene, because every scene changes depending on who's in it. Because like, you know, if Jake and Elwood are not in a scene together, you don't have to like play with their relationship.
Right.
But I'll put the palette, all the promises of the premise at the top of my scene. And then I'll write the scene and I'll look to the top and I'll say, am I missing any of these paints, any of these promises that should be in the scene? And usually if the scene has shortcomings, it's always because I'm not playing with one of these why now, why here, genre, subgenre, tone, gimmick, relationships, and skill sets and hobbies. So it's just something that I feel like this movie does. Every scene, every one of those promises, the paint is being played. That's why it feels so dynamic and so much is happening, because they're playing with all of the things on their palette. So that's my...
And just thinking about something you just said, I'm trying to think. There's no scenes except for the opening where the Blues Brothers are apart, is there?
Yeah, they're pretty much together.
They're together in almost every shot, I think, for the rest of the movie. Outside
to your point, Jamie, about them being one entity.
One entity, right? Yeah, they're yeah.
But so a lot of times when I get a script, it's so easy to just look at it like this and be like, okay, what's going on here? And the easiest comp would be like, let's say I have a Christmas movie, and I get these a lot, where I have a scene and there's nothing Christmas about it. And I go, well, you're missing the why now time setting paint. Like, we're in a Christmas time setting, therefore what should be happening should be Christmas time setting painted. And it's not. And then when they put the paint on there, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I feel like I'm reading an awesome Christmas movie now. So that's the idea there. It's like showing Marty McFly in 1955, and then what we're seeing him is having a conversation about like something that we could hear in 2025. You know what I mean? Like not playing with like the weirdness and the man out of timeness of the conversation, right, even. But you'd be shocked how often I'm reading a script and like I just listed seven promises that usually should be in every scene, and it's only playing with one of those, and they're leaving the other 6 colors off the scene. And it's like once you start adding these and playing with these, all of a sudden the scene becomes so unique and fresh. So it's just another thing to help.
Just it's a good tool.
It's a good tool, but it's hard to explain.
Yeah, no, it is. That's one of those things I don't think I would have ever verbalized without this show. If we hadn't done this show, I wouldn't have known to call it that. I think innately I know that if you're making a Christmas movie, it should be about Christmas or have Christmas stuff on it. But I would have never verbalized that.
That's the easiest one because it's just so universal.
Or Halloween.
Any holiday.
Really,
the holiday is the why now time setting.
Or like a movie about a wedding. Everything has to be about like any theme.
It doesn't have to be, but when it is, it feels right.
It feels right, yeah.
It feels right, yeah.
I think there are a lot of people that are just instinctively good at this too.
Yeah, they do it intuitively.
But that doesn't mean there aren't people that don't do it intuitively, and they're the ones really at who the message is for.
Usually what I'll do is like I'll get a script and I'll explain this concept, and then I will actually write all the promises that their script has. And then I'll be able to go through and I'll be like, the reason this scene is not working is because look at all the things here that you're not doing in this scene. And then you can really just use it as sort of like your compass for every scene to make your movie as specific as you're trying to be.
Cool. Story DNA.
Yeah. So I mentioned this before. Again, I think with the Blues Brothers, there's no inherent story DNA that, there's no inherent story when you say the Blues Brothers. Before this movie was invented, they were a music act. So what's interesting about the story DNA here is I think in all the best ways, it's ham-fisted to create a good movie.
Mhm.
So I think they checked all the boxes with story DNA. So I'll give you what story DNA is. Story DNA is largely it's what goes into a log line. It's four things: a hero, the hero's goal in the movie, an obstacle in the way, and stakes, why it matters. What happens if they lose, essentially. So will the hero achieve the goal despite the obstacles, or will the horrible thing in the stakes happen? Okay. And this movie, I think the reason it's interesting is because it hits them all very much on the nose, maybe in a somewhat contrived manner, because they're going to lose the orphanage, right? That's a common, like, if you have nothing else when you're coming up with a premise, like a lot of people are like, I'm going to get evicted, or grandma's going to get kicked out of the nursing home, or there's something like that. It's kind of a
Literally,
classic.
losing an orphanage sounds like a hack premise.
It sounds like a hack premise that was
Yeah.
probably done in like some 1930s movie back
Right.
in the day, but it's like one of the classic tropes of stakes. They're going to lose the orphanage. So what's the goal? The goal is to raise what is it, $5,000?
$5,000.
5,000,
Yeah. And the tactics this duo uses, because it is kind of premise paint related. It's to get the band back together and make the money via that way. The obstacles in the way. Now, this is the one interesting thing. Typically, you might come up with an obstacle, or maybe there's obstacles and sub-obstacles. But because of the nature of this movie, instead, they just throw lots of different obstacles at them. There's the Nazis, there's the cops, there's the mystery woman that's trying to kill them. There's many
bunker
different
guys. Yeah.
Exactly. There's many different obstacles that are trying to stop them. In addition to the fact that maybe the band doesn't want to get back together in the first place. So this movie does a really good job of just illustrating story DNA, even if it's doing it in almost the most stock trope sort of ways. But it shows you how they had to build a story almost from whole cloth, and they kind of went through and they said, well, we need a goal, we need an obstacle, we need stakes, and that keeps the whole thing, the momentum of the story actually moving. So that's all I got. That's all I wanted to say about story DNA for this one.
So despite its silliness and its madness, at its core, it has a very arc plot cheeseburger construction.
Very, very arch plot. We talk about the goal with the photo finish. Make sure it's not an internal goal. Make sure it's something that we could take a picture of, and we can take a picture of them handing the money over to Steven Spielberg and get the receipt is the picture in some way that they get.
We get it.
Yeah.
Him
and then they
stamping.
put handcuffs.
Right.
It's a great 1-2 punch. Good news, bad news.
Is that all you had for story DNA, both of you?
Yeah, that's it.
Cool.
That's it.
Why this is one that I'm interested to hear what you say. Why the music performances matter. I've heard this criticized about this movie before.
Yeah, I disagree. That's why I wanted to bring it up. I mean, Bob, as a huge fan of this movie, do you think that they all matter?
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
of course.
Why?
Outside of script reasons, they're the reason the movie exists.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I, young Jamie and myself love the car chases and all that stuff, like that stuff is there to prop up the point of this enterprise, which is the musical performances. Do they have a story function? I think they do, but I think that you have a couple
I
answers
do.
written down.
I
But
do.
yes, I agree. They have a story function too.
My this was sort of where I leaned my attention to as I was watching, to see if it was in the construction, right?
Right,
It
right,
wasn't just like, let's get James Brown, let's get Aretha Franklin.
right.
It was like there was I assumed after not watching it for 30 years that it was going to be one of these things where it was inconsequential. What I mean by that is like what is it? Therefore, but what is that, Jamie?
It's you mean the Trey Parker thing?
Yeah.
Instead of saying and then, you say therefore.
Therefore, because of whatever,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we've done comedies on this show that function just like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and that's fine because it's a comedy. What I was surprised was I think every one of these is consequential and works on multiple levels and isn't just music. It's like it has a purpose and it matters to the movie. So I was just kind of go down the list, and it's pretty awesome, man. First of all, I think the James Brown church scene is the catalyst, right? Because like,
yeah, definitely.
that's he sees the light, right? And so like without that,
you question it's not the catalyst. How could that not be the catalyst?
I don't want to assume I know everything, you know.
I mean, I'm just saying in this movie, the movie itself is almost jokingly.
It's a mission from God.
Right. It's like this. It's almost a joking catalyst. It's like,
so there you go. The first one, bam.
Yeah.
If there is no James Brown singing in the church, he doesn't see the light, and there is no movie, and there's no mission. So consequential. The Gimme Some Lovin' in the bowling alley, that shows that the band is that they're out of practice and they kind of need to get better, right?
Right.
Shit, like if you didn't have that sort of like before world, right? It's like a before world of their performance ability. Like
it also
he's been in jail.
why they would bother to go with them.
To get the band.
Like, these guys aren't trustworthy, but also our lives and our performances are not where we want to be.
They're not gonna. We need the band.
They're not happy.
Like it reinforces their need for all of that for the mission to continue. And then the Ray Charles thing, the Ray Charles music store scene, they need instruments, and it's this collaborative performance ends up being why they're able to get the instruments. So it's consequential. Like without that musical number and collaborating there, they wouldn't get their instruments. So once again, it matters. It's not and this happens and this happens. It's but therefore. And then the Aretha Franklin, I feel like there's like maybe some of the most tension in the movie is like in this scene where they're trying to get this one band member back, and like he's got really reason to stay. Like this is his business with his wife, and she's begging him like, we need you here. Like, what are you doing? So there's a lot of tension there. So there's resistance, and we need that to have it feel like when they get their victory that it mattered, right? Their teammates also had to go through shit in order to like get the money.
Also, with that scene, you have, instead of the other cast members, they needed convincing to trust them. Mm-hmm. Whereas in that scene, those two want to go with the Blues Brothers.
Absolutely.
But life and stuff is keeping them back from. So it's different. It's different.
It's got flavor. That's a variety. Yeah. That's good. But I feel like it's consequential, right? I feel like it matters. It's not a nothing burger. Nothing burger in the diner scene. The Rawhide, it shows the characters adapting, right? They have to do sort of like a MacGyver move, right? They got to sing country music. They sing stuff. They got to play to the crowd that they got, right?
It also shows that Jake and Elwood really have no plan.
Yes, it reinforces their sort of like fly by the seat of their pants nature of it all. Yeah. So I think it's consequential. I think it shows them, going through things. And if you take it out of the movie's not as good for that reason. And
also
then
gives more villains.
They got the good old boys and Bob, right?
Is his
Bob.
Name? Yeah. Bob.
Yeah. And then even I think the Cab Calloway performance at the Palace Hotel, like that has a reason. He's like buying Jake and Elwood time. He's a time buyer, right?
Right. Yep.
I talked about those ticking clock techniques. He's buying the band time. The band is buying them time, so it does matter. It's not just a musical number; like it has a reason for the story. And then the big finale. I mean, we needed to see the big finale, and it needed to be awesome. Like in order for that, and then even the Jailhouse Rock sort of reinforces that even though they got in trouble, they're still great.
The finale functions as far as the SNL movie goes. That's their catchphrase. You know what I mean? Like in every SNL movie, they have to do the thing they do from the sketch.
Yes,
that performance is that.
It's the trailer moment of
it's the trailer. It's the thing they're famous for. The thing they did on SNL.
Yeah.
So
I think every song serves the story. I think every song like pushes the characters. I think every song like is consequential and matters, and it's not just music to have music in there. So I was really surprised to see that, and I have heard the same thing as you, Bob. That like one complaint I've heard is, oh, it's just music to have music. But I think that's assumption. I think that's instructive. Like if you're writing a musical, you know,
I get the assumption to be negative about it and say they just wanted, James Brown to perform. I get that because who wouldn't want that?
Yeah.
Right. And also, if it was just that, it's also kind of fine. Like, I like why? Who cares if it didn't have a point? I don't think I dislike the movie, but it does have a point, and that's.
But it was a nice surprise to find that it was instructive in its use of musical numbers. Yeah, totally. As a writer, yeah.
And John, if you've ever heard John Landis talk about this, he's very defensive about it being a musical. Like he says, it angers him when people don't consider a musical.
That's great.
What's interesting on the rewatch, and this is probably obvious to a lot of people out there, but I guess living through this time period, I mean, this was something I saw in real time. John Landis did the Thriller video, and I always kind of associated, he did the Thriller video because of American Werewolf in London, because of the werewolf stuff in the beginning. But then when I watched this, I'm like, oh, he did like 10 music videos in this movie. You know what I mean? Like he did 10 very large, epic music videos, essentially. And
big time choreography going on.
Big time choreography. And I never, like I said, it's probably an obvious thing, but I never connected the two. I always went to American Werewolf in London and just said that was the reason why. But when I watched this, I was like, oh, okay. He's been doing this for a while.
I definitely had that aha moment too. I was like, oh yeah, Thriller dude has been doing this.
Yeah. He's been doing it.
I think that's why he's so defensive of it being a musical, because no one considers the fact that he made a musical. Not defending John Landis.
James Brown and Aretha Franklin.
I know, but it's undeniable, those huge numbers. I mean, like the Ray's Music Exchange thing has that like outside element to it, which is nuts. Yeah. It's huge stuff.
Yeah.
Even the church scene, that's insane.
Super impressive.
Yeah.
Yes.
It really is. Okay. We've talked about this before. Coincidences in comedies.
This is my mine. I don't really have a book report here, but I wanted to talk about it with you because it was like the most noticeable thing to me.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Jamie, do you want to kind of introduce the idea of the one coincidence rule first?
Sure. So there's kind of an idea that you get one coincidence, like one person could be struck by lightning, but then if you have somebody get struck by lightning and bit by a radioactive spider, that would be going a little too far. So it's usually okay to have
hilarious, by the way.
There's probably movies out there that have done that.
No, Spider-Man 3. Remember the symbiote falls from space?
No,
it's 10 feet away from Spider-Man, the only guy on the planet
who has super
powers.
Yeah, it's like
sorry to derail that.
No, I mean, honestly, when I watched that movie, I was like, that's the first thing that went through my mind.
I know. I was like, wait a minute.
Almost at that point.
The symbiote wasn't seeking out his superpower. He just fell next to it.
Yep.
God, I love it.
And then there's even more coincidences in that movie too.
Yeah.
Like there's like 3 more that happen. But anyway, that's basically the idea. If you have a movie with too many coincidences, Force Awakens was another one I remember had a couple of coincidences that I was just like, this is early on that I was just like, this is too many. But if you start seeing like 2 is, it can take you out of the movie and be like, The writers didn't even try. They just forced the plot forward by some random event happening.
But it's
for no other
genre
reason.
specific though, right?
It
Like
is genre specific, and
there's like 6,000 coincidences in a
So-
Seinfeld episode.
So
It's fine, right?
if you look at Robert McGee's triangle, that we talk about arch plot, mini plot, anti plot. He has in the anti plot version coincidence. So arch plot is your cheeseburger movie, cause effect, setup payoffs, closed endings, single heroes. Anti plot is looser day in the life stuff, maybe more internal. And anti plot tends to be more surreal stuff like David Lynch. But Robert McGee does list Wayne's World kind of in that corner. And he says the reason is because the world exists, that coincidence could happen, kind of anything can happen. And I think that's what he's kind of reaching at, is once you get away from the real world and the real rules, you can bring in things like coincidence just for a laugh or just to move things forward. Or nobody's sitting there expecting the world to work like the real world.
yes,
Right,
yes.
exactly.
And we've talked about other exceptions. Jamie, you've mentioned in the past the mini plot stories, the stories that are like biographies where we know what's going to happen in that character's life, where destiny is at play. When you're writing a story where destiny is play, then coincidence becomes motivated and organic because destiny is making these coincidences happen. So stories where destiny is at play, drama, or comedy, then coincidence is your friend. But what we've pointed out when we do comedy scripts is that all of that goes out the window. That coincidence becomes a part of the joke, and
Especially with tone.
yes, and
if you're making Austin Powers, it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, this movie made me think about this topic so much because every time there was a coincidence, there were coincidences. So there's another addition to this, that the Pixar rule is coincidences that get your character into trouble are good. Coincidences that get your character out of trouble are lazy writing. But
not in
this
comedy.
movie, not in comedy.
If it's funny, it's okay.
If it's funny, it's okay. And that's what I think is instructive about this movie, because every time the coincidence happens, it's fucking hilarious.
Right.
It's a coincidence that they happen to drive by the state troopers that are looking for them while they're getting chased by the good old boys. But then when the state troopers pull out, they crash into the good old boys, and that gets them out of trouble. But it's hilarious.
Right.
Yeah, so we laugh, so we don't care. And then like the Palace Hotel one is just like, when that started happening, I was like, this movie is like trying to look at us and be like, see, like this is the point, where like the record producer just so happens to be
show
there,
up,
and he's got $10,000 in cash, which is double what they need. And he's willing to go out of his way to go back. He promises to go to Ray Charles and give him the money for the instruments. And by the way, he also just happened to used to work at this place. And he knows exactly where there's a secret door that they can escape from the cops. And it's just all of the solutions are handed to our characters all in the same moment. And in a normal script, the three of us would be going, this fucking sucks.
Right.
But it's hilarious.
With the tone.
So.
I mean, this is really weird to say, but before they get into the Palace Ballroom, they do the whole walking in time with the music thing. I know this is dumb, but I was watching it and I was thinking, like, in the other scenes where the band is playing and they show exterior shots, you can't hear the music. So that music is only being heard by the audience, and Jake and Elwood are coincidentally walking in time to the music they cannot hear. You know what I mean? And that's the movie you're watching. So you'll forgive everything pretty much because that's the movie you're watching.
So I just think it's instructive that if this movie's a great example that if you're writing a comedy, it's fine if you have coincidences if it's part of the joke, so
as long as it's funny, you get away with it. That's like a saying in stand up too. If it's funny, no one's going to complain. I'm serious. That's same thing with scripts.
It makes sense.
Yeah,
it's applicable.
And I think that's everything we really had. This was I think I said to you guys before we started, like Blues Brothers is also remarkably simple and in the best way possible. It's not a complex interwoven plot or anything. So yeah, this is a pretty short outline, but it's great in that way. Did you guys have anything left you wanted to say about Blues Brothers? Pretty good. All right, so we actually have a listener's question. I'm going to read it. It's from Peter, right?
Mm-hmm. I don't have Peter's last name.
No, we'll just say Peter. He'll know.
It's Bogdanovich.
Peter Bogdanovich, right? Our most famous listener.
He always has all these questions.
Right. We don't read most of them, but he's always sending them.
I don't know who you guys are joking about.
Peter Bogdanovich? You Google him after the show.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, here's the question. In the Bad News Bears episode, you made a comment about Walter Matthau pulling a face or giving a look to express his feelings. Then you said it would probably need to be vocalized now if it were a modern movie. Would you say this is the norm now, that you need to spoon feed people? Or could you still use expressions to give the same message? I hope this makes sense. Great show. You may have already answered this question. I only started listening 7 days ago, and I've heard 22 episodes so far. Cheers, Peter. Well, first off, thanks for listening to 22 episodes in
Peter.
7 days. That's
hell yeah.
I want to apologize almost. That's a lot. I'm sorry. Jeez, that's crazy. Thank you. All right. So there's the question by Peter. I think Jamie, you said you were the first one to say you kind of had a thought on this.
So a couple things. One, there's two parts of this. One is the opinion of modern filmmaking and whether or not you have to do it that way or you could do it the subtle way or whatever. I'm sure there's movies in modern filmmaking that sometimes take the subtle approach, that sometimes do it with just a look. You hear actors talk about that all the time. Like it's a common trope almost where you get like in an interview and it's like the writer had all this stuff, but De Niro came up to me and said, I can do it all with just this look or something. You hear that a lot. And my experience as a writer is in development, they need it spoon-fed. And then when you get to the day of, or when you get to the director, they scale it back. So what does that mean to you? That means if you're a screenwriter, I would err on the side of the person reading your script has 10 scripts to read and is reading 100 miles an hour and is not interacting with your script in a very thoughtful or, subtle sort of way or anything like that, meaningful sort of way. They are really just trying to cram the information into their brain so they can kind of get the gist, write their coverage and make a decision or something, or and maybe the second read, they'll take a more thoughtful read. So I tend to write for the least attention span is what I do. So I write a little bit more heavy-handed. And by the way, this is a strategy I've come to over the years. I used to be the opposite. I used to be like, I never write that on the nose thing. And then after many years of getting notes in development, like let's say it was that scene, I guarantee you someone out of the 6 people giving me notes would be like, I don't understand why Walter Matthau lets them run back on the field after he just yelled at them. It doesn't make sense. Somebody would say that. And I'd be like, well, didn't they understand that he kind of looked at them and he felt what they were feeling and he had empathy and he changed his mind? But no, they wouldn't. They would just write that note. That's what I would get. So there's really, then the question is, how have I changed? Like, what do I write now? And there's 2 methods. One method would be to verbalize it, like literally look at them and he'd say, forget me, I'm an asshole. Go on the field, have fun, and that would be it. And that's one method. That's one heavy on the nose method. The other one I tend to use more if I get that note is I'll say, like, let's say the script said, what Buttermaker looks at the kids all look sad and like this is, the worst day of their lives or something like that. And then I might put something in the action, like in this moment, he knows he's the biggest douchebag in the world and kids should just be kids or something like that.
Mhm.
And that's what I would actually be on the nose with an unfilmable in the action. And
Because it is filmable.
It is filmable because we saw it, right? He saw it.
And you can perform that.
You can perform that. So you're doing the work of the actor on the page in some ways. You're saying, "Hey actor, I need you to sell your look so it says he gets it, or whatever.
Right.
He sees that the kids should just have fun." And that's I tend to do it more often that way. I tend to be very liberal. Like if I ever do have a moment that has an unsaid thing, I tend to say it. I tend to put it down. I try to do it in the most economical and poetic way I can. But honestly, I don't trust that people, after years of doing it and years of people coming back and saying, I don't understand why I let him back in the field. It doesn't make sense. I just got sick of that. So I started to say, here's what you'll believe when you watch the movie and the actor. Here's what you believe. And if the actor can't pull that off, I tell you what happens then. In post-production, they go back and ADR it. And then you'll see the kids' faces. And you'll hear some random voice go, hey kids, go have fun. Or something. With no emotion.
I was wrong, kids. You should go out on the field now.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's my answer to that question.
I'm gonna bounce off of I love all of that, Jamie, and I co-signed on everything you said. On the producer note side, so there's been a couple episodes of this show where we've had some issues with some heavy-handed stuff in an otherwise not heavy-handed movie. And we've sort of talked about both of our experiences, Jamie and I, with producer's notes. And so Jamie would be like, well, that line sounds like a producer note, right? Like that line was popped in there because one of the 6 people who's has to okay this before it moves forward was like, I don't understand this. And so you're like, okay, fine. We'll just have him say the dumbest thing possible because this one producer needs to sign off on.
Yep.
And so, for instance, oh boy, I'm going to sound like a total asshole here, but
too late. No, I'm kidding.
My last assigned work for hire that got to multiple steps of the process. There were 14 lines that I just added from, because there were 7 producers and they had notes and they all had their own issues with some expositional stuff that I thought was very easy to understand, but they wanted it to be super explained in dialogue. So I just was like, all right, you want them to say this? That's fine. I just want the movie to get made. Yep. I don't care.
Yep.
And so like there's literally 14 lines in the script that I didn't write, that the producer wrote, because I just wanted to make them happy. And yeah, I don't like them, but I thought the movie would exist, so I was willing to compromise and dumb it down a little bit. So a lot of this spoon-feeding nature of maybe modern media has a lot to do with that. There's a lot of decision makers who aren't the writer, but they have to approve the writing in order for it to move forward. So, and as a writer, you might not get a chance on the post-production end unless you're involved in that side of things to say, hey, like, can we try cutting this out because it was never intended to be? Whereas like if a director is getting those producer notes, they might pop it in the script. And then when they get to the post, they'll just cut it out. They were never going to keep that line in there, So they were like, we'll just say the line and like, we'll cut it out in the post-production. But anyway, so on that side of things. On the other side of things, Jamie, I do exactly the same thing as you. If I can't tell you the number of times where I've written the on the nose line, and then I've decided that is too on the nose, but I want the clarity, and so I'll actually make that line in the description. So it would be like, Joe apologizes with his eyes, and then like the line that he said originally, I'll just say that with italics, like character voice in the action line, so it can be performed by the actor, and it's not a cheat, and you don't have to have the character then say it with their own words. So the bad version of this is what I see all the time and vent to Jamie and Bob about, which is I'll read scripts that do not have any emotional clarity in their descriptions, and it'll literally read like this: Bob looks at Jamie, Jamie looks at Jimmy, Jimmy looks at Bob. And that's
they don't say what type of look.
You'll just so that's the bad version.
Right.
And I would say if you're out there listening and that's a problem you've noticed about your own work, go into the stories active verb cheat sheet. They have a PDF that's really easy to find. If you just type that into Google, go into the story active verb cheat sheets. They have 90 words for looks that are more evocative and specific. So instead of looks, you can use these other words that specify the emotion. And me as a reader, I'm not going, Bob looks at Jamie, Jamie looks at Jimmy,
right.
Jimmy looks at Bob. Don't do that.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that.
Dude, hours of my life reading that sentence.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've had clients that kind of say, "What? You didn't understand? It's all in there."
Yeah,
and it's that because they're thinking of the actors and stuff like that, but when you just read it translated on the page, sometimes it doesn't work. And again, if you're not like fully engaged, if this isn't like if you're a director, maybe you're reading it and picturing the actors and picturing how you're going to direct it, and you might come up with a different way to do it. And it has been my experience, and I know this is kind of redundant, but that I might write on the nose, and then when it gets to the director, they're like, "This dialogue's all on the nose," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And the director changes it. They have me change it back to the way I would have written it, and then in ADR, the director gets the note. Like, we don't understand. They go through the same thing I go through in development. They go through in post because they get 10 people and one person doesn't get like the face. You know what I mean? It's like they don't understand what Walter Matthau's doing, and they're like, "I don't understand." And then they have to do the ADR, and that's why you get all these crappy ADR kind of lines. And the worst thing about the ADR lines is sometimes they just take exactly what the producer said and put it in.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah,
that's what I have done when I get the note. I'm just like, if that's what you want it to be, then that's fine. Let's move on.
Just pay for it, as long as you're paying for it.
Yeah, and they'll just be like, literally, I've seen it. They come in Excel spreadsheets, and it says, "Have actors say this line," and it's just the producers writing it, and they just record it and throw it in the movie.
This is modern movie making, and make sure they have 2 million followers on Instagram.
Whenever I watch a movie, like, it's so obvious to me what the ADR lines are, especially in TV. You see it more in TV because they do it a lot in TV, and you'll just see like it'll be the back of somebody's head, and there'll be a 2-shot, and they'll say something that's very on the nose and clarifying in some ways. I'm like, oh, there's an ADR, and you'll hear them all the time. So the other trick though I got used to doing is, and again, this is another on the nose producer trick, but I used to always say, if you get a note from a producer, is there a way to put that note on the lips of a character? So if there was somebody saying like if I got a note from the producer that said, why are they doing this? Or how do they feel? Like, I'd literally have a character say, "Why are you doing this? How do you feel?" And then I just answer it. And the producer would go, "Oh, okay," and they check off their note.
This is great.
Yeah.
How do you feel? I love the idea of a character saying, "How do you feel?
How do you
feel?
how do you feel right now?" And he'd be like, I feel horrible. What do you think? I'm mad. And I just put that in. And
they're in a situation where no one sane would feel not horrible. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to say
yeah, and it would always get cut out in post or something. It's
I
like,
know.
but it's just kind of like one of these things. Another producer would check the box. Yes, that works now.
That's
that
what I'm
works.
saying. You
That
sometimes
totally
you
works.
just gotta do it.
And I evolved from that to putting them in the action line. So I try to get away with the action line first because
I do that. That's what I try
it's,
first. Yeah.
Joe slams his fist on the table. He feels horrible. Instead, instead I literally
obviously we'll be right better than that.
Yeah,
but
it's just funny hearing it so bland.
I literally take their note and just copy and paste it almost into the script and write the answer to it in the spot where I think they should realize that the person is mad or sad or whatever. I'll just put it there, and usually it gets a check. It's usually like, and it used to be that like the director and I would sit there and say, how do they not realize it's obvious? They say these things and this and that. And I was like, look, let me just put this one sentence in and we'll check it off. It really doesn't change the script at all. It's just saying, here's how you're supposed to feel at this moment, or here's what you missed because either your comprehension skills were off, which is a lot of times what it is, or they just need actors and stuff to be performing this. And, when they read in the page, they don't have the imagination to kind of pull all that in. So they need some help. But anyway,
I only have two small things to say because from my non-teachery perspective, one, my brain instantly goes to the thought of them re-editing the ending of Independence Day and how they made the decision that Randy Quaid has to make the decision to sacrifice himself, and they reshot that. And if you guys remember that scene, it's just Randy Quaid longingly looking at the picture of his family. And then when I read this question, I was thinking, what if Randy Quaid was like, I guess I need to sacrifice myself for the good of the world, even though I love my family and won't see them again. Like, just the thought of how horrible that would be in that moment.
No, I'll give it credit. Like there's another version of that where the picture wasn't in the scene.
It wasn't in the cockpit.
And that's the
you
part
can dramatize that.
In some ways that's like if you're really not executing that moment, like sometimes like that is the answer, is like, and you put the picture and
if they didn't film it and they can't reshoot it, you have to say it. But
yeah, exactly. Like
that's right where my mind went is Randy Quaid saying, I will now sacrifice myself for the world.
Right.
Or something like that. It's just such a terrible scene.
Yeah.
But you could workshop that sentence you just said, Bob, into a really succinct, evocative action line and achieve that thing.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be as good. I don't think him vocalizing even a well-written.
Oh yeah, I know what I'm saying. I'm saying like as a script writer,
yes,
you could write what you
to get it
said
to get it there.
So
that you can film it properly, just to get people to sign off.
He looks at the picture. He knows what he must do.
Yes.
Right.
This is.
But you'd be surprised how often people are afraid to write that second sentence.
Yes. Well, when I came up in screenwriting, when I first was learning, I was in a screenwriting group of people that had been doing it for a long time, and kind of came from academia of different disciplines, and they insisted you weren't allowed to do it.
Yes.
So if I even wrote anything that even hinted at that, they would circle it in red,
the editorials,
and say, this is a tell. You got to show me how they do that. Don't tell me, any of this. And honestly, if we went on Twitter and or X or whatever it is
with this,
and we posted this, you would get a flood of mostly newer screenwriters.
Hacks. They don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Don't listen to them. You can't. That's show don't tell.
You mean calling you guys hacks?
Yes, absolutely.
But wait a minute.
For what we're
that's
saying,
because of the lack of nuance, though. Because what you guys are saying is you're giving points on how to get it essentially you're trying to get something to the point of existing, whereas those people yelling at you would be like yelling at you for creative, artistic reasons or something. They don't understand how shit works.
They think it would be a rule that you had to follow.
No, you're just saying.
And bad screenwriters went against the rule. I
You're trying
guarantee
to please
the,
money men.
the other thing I guarantee you is not a single pro would come out and say that. Like not a single
100%.
not
Yeah,
a
yeah,
single
yeah.
person with credits that made a living at screenwriting would say you can't do that. Not a single one. But
Yeah.
you'd get a flood. A flood. I mean, it would almost be 50-50, where it would be that's not how you do it. That's against the rules. You can't do it that way. That's a hacky way to do it. There would be a flood of people saying, don't do that on the nose thing. And honestly, when I teach students, I kind of teach them not to do it, but I always tell them it's okay to do it. Like
Right.
I kind of speak out of both sides of my mouth. I say, here's why you don't do it. Here's why you do it. But just know both things. And when you do it intentionally. Don't do it because you're lazy. Um,
Yep.
and once you know that, and that's true of everything in screenwriting. If you do, I'm always like, you can break any rule you want. Like as a save the cat person, if I'm guiding you down the save the cat path, I'm like, look, break any save the cat rule you want, but don't do it because you're lazy or because you missed it or because you just don't understand it. Do it because you intentionally have a purpose to go do something, and you're doing it with total intention. And that's the way all screenwriting works to an extent.
The second thing I just wanted to say real quick to answer his question from the perspective of like sociologically, I guess. I don't know how else to say it, but he's kind of asking like, do you have to spoon feed the audience? You guys answered from an industry producer perspective. I
Right.
was just going to say like from a broad perspective, so many people I know, both in real life, online, and so many people I see, uh, there's a big portion of the population that no longer can watch TV and even movies without subtitles. And also on top of that, the most popular trend on TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts is what? Intense amount of captions for everything. We're living in a world where captions have somehow become this like almost necessity. As a guy who edits for companies and stuff, let me tell you, captions are extremely required and important now. And there's something like I feel like that goes hand in hand with what's being asked here. It's like because that's literally the culture saying we need what the characters are saying to be spelled out on screen for us to understand and keep up. So I think that affects
I
I think
I
that affects what he's asking here is like a simple look won't do it. They need to have it like literally plainly say on the screen angry tone or
am,
like
am I remembering right that there was like a recent like Netflix leaker says they had to add dialogue because people read by captions or something. Wasn't there something like
I do
that?
remember
there's
that
something like there's
topic.
some
Yeah.
story like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
So I mean, if that's true, and by the way, a lot of people raced, a lot of professionals is another one of these things. When that hit socials, they were like, I produced 50 different shows for Netflix and I've never once had that note, so I take that with a grain of salt,
Sure.
but I
It
think there's,
seems sensational, but
yeah, there's, maybe the weird thing about that note was maybe they got it 10 people down the chain. Maybe they got it from a producer, not Netflix, but a producer said, Netflix likes when you have, and then they might
Mhm.
be,
well, I
and then
get
suddenly it became Netflix order.
I guess what I was kind of getting at is that we live in a culture that a lot of people do two things at once now.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I like it. I'm not approving of it. But a lot of people, even people I know that call themselves movies fans, look at their phone during a movie constantly.
Yeah.
And the reason the captions help is because that way they can, divide their attention easier.
I find it the
So,
opposite. Like I can't read while I
Jamie, I
watch,
agree,
but I can
but
hear. I can hear. So
no, it doesn't make sense.
yeah. So like the dialogue part I could see because I'd miss Walter Matthau's face. So like it kind of relates to the same thing in some parts. But I can agree
I'm
with
not
that.
part of this culture because I don't leave captions on unless it's a foreign movie or something.
Right.
But I have seen it talked about to extent. I've seen many younger people say they basically cannot watch without captions at all. They can't watch anything without captions. So I don't know. To me, that's like they can't look at someone's face and assume what they're saying. They have to read it and then comprehend it with text. So that I think
Yeah.
comprehending it with vocals is important So you might need to say things out, your characters to say things out loud so that the captions can translate it and they can read it.
That's yeah.
That's insane to say. But it's like, I'm mad, and then at the bottom of the screen it says he's mad, or like whatever. That's nuts. It's nuts, but I think that's part of where we are. I don't want to be an old man complaining, but yeah, it's not what it used to be.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. You can approach it from several different aspects. Thank you, Peter, and thank you for listening to so much of the show in such a short period of time. I almost want to do the math on 22 episodes in 7 days.
It's awesome.
That's how much of every day it's us.
That must be hell.
Oh God, yeah, that's so much of our voices. Anyway, I think that's everything, guys.
Yeah, I'll just say, if anyone has other questions, we actually have another one lined up. So it's great. It's fun to have these ready to rock. If anyone has questions about anything, you can find us at writersblockbusterspodcast@gmail.com.
If you want Jamie to list all the movies from 1981,
we'll just do that.
Have we done? We've probably done
That
in
could be
81.
the end of a podcast.
I think we did in 81. I think we.
How about 79? Did we do a 79?
Probably not. Probably
There
not.
you go.
So we did Star Wars 77. I can't think of a 79.
We'll have to make a spreadsheet
Rocky
of
was
years
76, 75.
that we've done so that Jamie can make sure he covers every year.
Yeah. Those years especially are interesting to me because they were years when I was a kid and saw everything. So but I forget those movies. They're not the ones that people, and they almost surprise you. Like 9 to 5 is the number 2 movie. It's just
Love
like
hearing
We should
that.
do 9 to
Wow.
5 at some point.
Absolutely.
But I am shocked at how well that did at a theater. I would have guessed 9,
Yeah.
and that would seem sane for 9 to 5. But
to me, the movie that always pops out to me, that's always the surprise, is Secret of My Success. Just like the number 2 movie of whatever year that was, And nobody talks about Secret of My Success.
I
one
love
of my script consultant mentors.
I love that movie, to be honest with you. But I'm surprised anyone remembers it.
Jack Epps Jr.
Yeah,
I saw it twice in the theater. Like that's how
Was
much
that because
my friends
of
and I liked
Michael J. Fox's popularity?
Yes.
That's how big he was at the moment.
He was pretty big, and I mean, people must have liked the movie or whatever, but it's just wild.
It's a incredible slice of 80s pie. And it's got the Ferris Bueller song in it. So,
That's kind of the only thing I remember about it. And like him sneaking around like with no clothes or something in the bushes or something.
I've said this before online. It makes an incredible double feature with American Psycho.
Okay.
It really does. I'm not even kidding. Did you have anything else you wanted to plug, either of you?
Nope. Nothing.
Nope. That's it.
Okay. Then I think that's everything. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Hey, this is Bob Rose, and thank you for listening to Writers Blockbusters. If you'd like to financially support the show, please consider joining my Patreon. I've been producing the podcast for several years completely out of pocket, and I'd like to keep producing it ad-free and no longer at a loss. If you'd like to help, head on over to patreon.com/Bob Rose Sucks. That's right, Bob Rose Sucks. And if you want the one and only Jimmy George to help polish up that writing project you're kind of struggling with, head on over to scriptbutcher.com. As a listener, you already know he's the best there is, scriptbutcher.com. You can also support the show by simply sharing it or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate both. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.